feeling good. Kingsman, The Golden Circle. It is the sequel to the surprise hit from 2015, which starred Colin Firth in a very surprising turn to action, which at that point he had never been known for. That was the least of the surprises that film provided, one of them being the absolutely remarkable debut of young talent Taron Egerton. This film ended up exploding. It became an absolutely wonderful sensation, which was definitely needed considering it came out the same weekend as 50 Shades of Grey. Logically, a sequel was inevitable, and it was announced that the sequel would be called The Golden Circle. And very quickly they also assured us that Colin Firth would be returning. How Colin Firth would be returning, it was anyone's guess. Well, he's back, and it was actually a very wonderful way to bring him back. Before I begin, it seems customary at this point to give you a warning. Because unfortunately, in order to get into some of the story elements, I'm going to have to. So, where we leave it, it is, well, they don't really specify, but I would say it would be a few years since the previous film. Well, Eggsy has evolved into a very good Kingsman agent, and, well, he's quite on top of the world. And actually, to the surprise to everyone who was disgusted by his tryst with the princess, well, turns out it was more than just a tryst. As it is, he is still very much in a relationship with the princess, and actually it was one of the sweetest things in this new film. It, oddly enough, actually provided some strong emotional heart for Eggsy. And really, it was a wonderful place to find him, as opposed to just him being a cold, distant agent. Well, what's interesting also is that this film starts with a bang. It wastes absolutely no time. In merely like 2 seconds, we're already thrown into a big chase sequence through the streets of London, involving, well, a former would-be colleague in the form of Charlie, who we thought was killed at the end of the previous film. Well, no, he's alive, and he's got a metal arm, and he's quite brassed off. Justifiably so. Well, he provides a actually pretty damn good henchman character to this film. Actually, to the point where I was really looking forward to seeing him get... because, well, most of the Kingsmen, including the absolutely wonderful Roxy from the previous film, get axed off in the top. And it's very sad. And because we got to know the world of the Kingsmen so well in the first film, it is genuinely sad when we see the mansion, the tailors, everything get completely blown up. We even got Michael Gambon as the new Arthur, and we didn't really get a chance to really get to know him, and I'm very sad about that. I mean, that was more of a glorified cameo than, well, there is another cameo in this film which is quite gargantuan, to the point where it's a bit like Tom Cruise in Tropic Thunder, where we thought it was going to be a cameo, and instead it became something a lot bigger. That one I will be a gentleman and absolutely not spoil. Obviously, with Kingsman destroyed and the only survivors being Merlin, once again played by the reliably wonderful Mark Strong, they both seek refuge with the Statesmen, the American cousins of the Kingsmen. And, well, they are indeed. And the one thing I have to say, like any good sequel should, it actually builds on the world that was being set up in the first film. And the Statesman is a very interesting addition to that. That's where we meet the leader, Champagne, played by Jeff Bridges, or Champ as he prefers to be called, and that's where we meet Agent Tequila, played by Channing Tatum. One of the first major caveats of this film is that Channing Tatum's role in the film is disastrously over-publicized. He's there for a brief couple seconds. He has a bit of a scrape with Mark Strong and Taron Egerton, and it's a good scrape and all that, but unfortunately he's practically written out like halfway in. Once we get a good extent of what the villainess's scheme is, and we see that he's going to be suffering from it, he's pretty much written out of the film for the bulk of it. And it's sort of underwhelming, really, and everything that he contributes to the film could have been handed over to his colleague, played by Pedro Pascal from Game of Thrones. Lovely to see him. Or, at the very least, could have been written out completely. So, it was a bit of a glorified cameo. His was more of a glorified cameo than the cameo that ended up serving the plot. Now, segueing into the villainess, played by Julianne Moore. Now, In the previous film, we had Samuel L. Jackson as Valentine, who, yes, he was an over-the-top villain like you would see in the classic Bond films. Well, she goes a bit further. She's demented. I will not deny. She's quite demented. And she grills a really mean hamburger. We also have Halle Berry, who is the statesman equivalent to Merlin, and she is a very welcome presence in the film, but she also really... She doesn't have much to say really character-wise, but it's sort of welcome, but she makes a stronger impression than Channing Tatum, and she actually has something of a character arc compared to him. Pedro Pascal has a much more developed arc, which I will say was more fulfilling when you get to the apex of his development. Now, to start with the good. As I said before, Taron Egerton is utterly wonderful, still carries this film, and that's a big thing considering he's surrounded by some top-shelf talent. And Colin Firth, his return, actually leads to some wonderful emotional moments. I actually got very, very misty-eyed, when I saw him again. But they take him down a very interesting road, which one could say is very similar to Agent K's in Men in Black 2, but I felt this was handled a hell of a lot better, with a much more weight to it. And the way he comes back into the fray is not clean. It works, but it's not clean. So it actually leads to some nice bit of stakes regarding his re-emergence back to being the man he used to be. So it was lovely. It definitely did not feel forced, and it definitely didn't feel clean. So it made Colin Firth's contribution to this film considerably more welcome. And to this film's wonderful credit, like any good sequel should do, it raises the stakes from the previous film. Now, of course, by saying that, yes, Roxy got killed, the Kingsmen are dead, but there's also other things that they throw in for extra measure. And because of these particular stakes, one character, his or her life, hangs in the balance, which, once again, Channing Tatum's character has a similar problem, and I'm like, why do we need to worry about him? Particularly since they freeze him, so he's out of the picture for the bulk of it. He's like, they freeze him, but I'm more interested in this character who's in a similar predicament, and the race and the clock is ticking. So I was more invested in seeing this particular character having this problem, as opposed to Channing Tatum, who gets frozen and basically written out of the film. It's utterly pointless. His character is pointless. And it's a shame. Channing Tatum is a very talented actor, both comedically and action-wise. So it's very, very sad to see that they didn't do much with him. Now, I wonder if it's because of his shooting schedule. That would make sense. I get it. But if that's all you're going to use him for, what is the point? There you go. So, I'm sorry, I keep saying I'm going to go to the good, but I keep going back to the bad. But I will say, I was still into it all the way through. This still felt like Kingsman to me. I was still having a great time like I did with the first film, and the action sequences are great. I was still really riled up all the way through. I was having a great time. And one thing I got to admit, Fox, you're on my list right now for your tangerine dreaming, and I will say to that, it was impressive that you were able to satirize what's going on in this particular climate. There was a very interesting debate regarding Miss Poppy's scheme and the collateral damage that was going to be involved, and there was an interesting debate that was being started involving Bruce Robinson playing the president, and there was like I said, there was a fascinating debate regarding the lives that are at stake. So here I was going, well, kudos to Fox for being willing to have a film that rips into that. Now, it's not a actual portrayal of the angry Oompa Loompa, but it was let's face it, you would expect him to do the exact same thing that this prick of a president basically does. So, kudos to Fox for letting that pass. But, still, you're his bitch. So, moving on, I suppose to say it all, there's a lot of extraneous plot going on in this, and it all stems from characters. I could safely say that this film could have been shaved down by maybe 20 minutes, maybe 20. I mean, there's a lot of action going on left, right, and center. There's stuff that maybe could have been combined into a different scene. There is a subplot involving Pedro Pascal's character, which normally spy movies go for this particular trope when it starts. You'll see what I'm talking about. But what made it work, and what made it okay, even though it was pretty much a repeat trope that you see in spy films, it was nice to see that his motivations were unique, all his own, and actually goes back to the debate regarding the president. So I was actually okay with it, because normally the motivations for doing what this character does is usually greed or money and all that stuff, the usual stuff people do, what this man does. And I was okay with it, and it did lead to a really great fight at the very end. But I can safely say it was another thing that maybe they could have found a way to truncate a bit more. So I guess you could say, in essence, Kingsman: The Golden Circle has a lot of good going for it. It is a worthy follow-up to Kingsman: The Secret Service. I will happily purchase this when it comes out on home video, but I won't deny that it is not, by any stretch of the imagination, a superior sequel, and because there is so much in there, and as you can actually have too much of a good thing, because this one indulges itself a bit too much, it does actually suffer a bit. So it's not a superior sequel, and it's a little bit under being an equal sequel. But nevertheless, I will happily purchase it. It is definitely not an X-Men Last Stand. I'd say more of a Age of Ultron. I'd say. Yes, maybe an Age of Ultron, maybe a bit of Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. In closing, I'm going to give Kingsman: The Golden Circle a 3.5. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Do you feel this is a vastly superior sequel? Do you feel that this one may be overindulged like I feel it did? Leave it in the comments below, and for more addictive content on Narcotic Casserole, simply like, share, subscribe, click Thou Shalt Be Served.